So anyway, I'm Jim Talian. I am the Capital Projects Program Manager, City of Fayetteville. I have been with the City of Fayetteville for only 5 months. I just moved there just recently to avoid retiring because I didn't want to retire. I really enjoy my job and want to keep working as long as I possibly can, but my wife insisted we move to Fayetteville. So I found a job in Fayetteville. This project that I'm going to talk about, this is, well, this is me. I used to work for the City of Lynchburg, Virginia, and that's where this project was based out of. I was the special projects manager in the Water Resource Department in the City of Lynchburg. I worked for the City of Lynchburg for 20 years prior to moving here in August. So the project, basically, the City of Lynchburg, very old city. We claim to have, well, not we anymore. They claim to have the second oldest water distribution system in the country after the city of Philadelphia. And it was getting old. It's been around for a long time. We realized we needed to replace all of the water lines downtown, which of course is the oldest part of the city. They had been there the longest, and they were reaching the end of their useful life sooner than the rest of the metropolitan area, obviously. So this is sort of the scope of the project: replace all the water lines. But Lynchburg, when we're going to do a project like that, especially something that's potentially that disruptive to the community, we only want to do it once. So we decided we were not only going to replace all the water lines, but we were going to look at all the sewer lines and all the storm sewer lines, all the sidewalks, all the streets, streetscaping, landscaping, and also the underground electric, which was not owned by the city, but the electric company decided that since we were going to be tearing up the streets anyway, they might as well go ahead and replace their electric distribution, their underground electric distribution system at the same time, because it too was just about as old, a little bit younger than our system, but it was also in significant need of being replacement. So we basically were tearing up, as I used to say, everything that you can see downtown and most of what you can't see underground. It was a pretty extensive project, both technically and in terms of disruption to the community, in particular the business community. Businesses do not like you to tear up the streets and the sidewalks in front of their front doors and leave it that way for 2 years. And they're not happy to hear that, but it needed to be done. Now, I think for the most part, the business community did realize that it needed to be done, and we weren't just choosing to do this. The entire program covers 50 blocks of downtown Lynchburg. We broke it into multiple phases, each phase being about 5 to 8 blocks, depending on the complexity of that particular region and how it all laid out as a puzzle wise. We had originally proposed a whole sequence of phases from 1 to 10, I think, and said each group what we were going to do in each block, but we quickly changed that because in the downtown environment, there's things happening. There's businesses coming and going, and people want to do development in a certain area, but they sort of want you to get there first. So we found that we were continually changing our schedule, and after about 3 changes, I made the decision we weren't going to publish a schedule anymore, because we would, as the program progressed, we would decide which blocks needed to be done next based on what was going on in the city at that particular moment in time. So as of right now, 18 of those blocks are complete, and 5 more are in design. Had started that design project before I left town. So we're getting we're getting close to almost halfway there if you throw in those other 5 blocks, which will go under construction, I believe, next spring was our plan to do that. So mitigating the impacts on the downtown businesses was really a huge part of the job. You really can't, as a city, we are not only the owner of the infrastructure, but we're the stewards of our business communities livelihoods, and we need them to be there. We need them to be successful. We need their tax revenue. We need the people that they draw into the city. So it was very, very important to the city of Lynchburg that we have a good relationship with our business community, and that we maintain that relationship and do whatever we could within reason to keep their businesses functioning and viable during this very disruptive process. And so, spoiler alert here, contractors are not always the best at mitigating the impacts of their work. Now, if there's any contractors in the audience, I love what you do. I'm glad what you do. I appreciate it, but that's not your strong point. So we knew that we had to have a contractor that was of a slightly different frame of mind than what we frequently see out in the world that we all live in on a regular basis. So the typical project delivery system, as you all know, is the design, bid, build process, which we've been around for many decades, probably longer than any of us have been in this business. But basically, the owner hires an engineer, and then the owner hires a contractor. And we've all probably done dozens and dozens of projects in that mold. Then of late, there's been this design build concept, which is certainly growing in popularity and becoming a very viable alternative. And we've probably heard a lot about that, where the owner hires one firm to handle both of those things. And it's a little easier to know where the responsibility is, because you don't have the contractor and the engineer pointing fingers at each other, blaming each other for whatever mishaps might occur. There's only one person responsible. But third, and what is the topic of this discussion, is the CMAR management philosophy, where the owner hires an engineer, but also hires a construction manager. And the construction manager essentially fills the role of the contractor. And I will probably go back and forth in my discussion today between those two terms. I generally mean the construction manager, even when I say contractor, and there is a subtle difference between them, as we will discuss here. But when I say contractor, I really mean the construction manager, and forgive me, I can't get out of that mode of referring to them as the contractor. So the CMAR process has some uniquenesses that make it stand out. And that's really what I really want to talk about, and how that related to this particular project that we had in downtown Lynchburg. So the 5 uniquenesses of a CMAR contract that I'm going to talk about are, first, that you're hiring a construction manager, not a contractor, and I'll go into how those roles are different. The second is a qualifications-based selection instead of a standard bid process. You hire based on the contractor's qualifications. Third is that the contractor, or the CM in this case, is involved in the design, which is certainly very different, but very valuable. Fourth is the risk allocation. As you are developing your contract with your CM, you and the CM are able to talk about the risk ahead of time. Before you sign the document, you're able to allocate that risk, and it really helps keep the price down a lot when you take some of the risk off the contractor. And finally, the guaranteed maximum price, which is a frequent component of CMAR contracts and a way to control costs. I will certainly have a lot of interesting things to say about that. So number one, you are hiring a construction manager and not a contractor. So I have listed up here on the screen, and I hope I'm not blocking the view of anybody in the screen. Sorry, Gene, if I'm blocking your view of the screen. So the contractor often feels like a competitor. It often feels like it's a win-lose situation. You either win or you lose every single conversation you have with a contractor, and you really don't want that kind of relationship So you want a CM, a contractor that's on your team, that you are working together to accomplish the same goal and not working against each other to see who gets the most money and who gets the least amount of work. It's so that's one of the real philosophies of hiring the CM instead of the contractor. Second, a contractor does the work. A contractor builds things for you. In the CMAR system, there's certainly a lot of flexibility in how you write your contract, but we wrote our CM contracts in a mode that the CM could only perform 10% of the work, and they had to sub out everything else. So they, for the most part, weren't really doing the construction work, but they were actively managing a multitude of subcontractors that performed the work instead of the CM actually doing the work themselves. I guess basically the contractor builds the projects where the CM is managing the project. A contractor needs to make profit, and he makes profit from construction. That's what they do. That's what their living is. That's how they make their money and their livelihood. But a CM profits from a fee. So he gets a standard fee instead of getting a percentage of the construction dollar, which is a significant way to change the dynamic of the relationship. So the contractor no longer has to be advocating for higher prices for any change orders. He's getting the same standard fee no matter how it works. So there is no incentive for them to have any intent to manipulate the budget in a way that brings them more money, because it doesn't bring them any more money. And in fact, it can bring them less money. We wrote our contracts, and this is a pretty standard way to write a CMAR contract, is to share the savings. Any savings that results that the CM can produce and reduce the budget, we wrote it such that they share in that savings, and they got 25% of whatever they could save the city. So again, the intent here is to get you on the same team. So if they save us money, they're getting more money themselves, as opposed to the other way around, where they get more money from us, we lose, they win, or they win and we lose. And so it's a methodology to bring the two organizations onto the same team and create that atmosphere. And then I think I mentioned this already, that the contractor generally does their own work, but we limited it to 10%. So that's basically the difference between a CM and a contractor. And that is very key in the CMAR process. The second difference between a construction manager and a contractor is that you have qualification-based selection. Now, we have always, as a city, we've always hired our engineering firms based on qualifications. We publish a request for proposals. The engineers submit their qualifications. We evaluate those qualifications and choose who we feel is the most competent engineer to do that particular work. We'll take that same concept and apply it to the contractor. Have your contractors or your CM submit a proposal on how they intend to pursue this project. Then the city evaluates those proposals and selects a CM based on their qualifications, not on a low bid. In a bid situation, you have to write specifications, and writing specifications is tedious, difficult. It's so difficult to cover every single possibility that may or may not come up. So you have to write specs that attempt to address those kind of things. Whereas within a CMAR, since the construction manager is getting his fee from is getting his profit from the fee, you do not have to be as all encompassing in writing your specifications. You can be a lot more flexible and allow the various things that come up to be addressed in a way that is not puts you against each other. But then you ask the logical question is, well, how do you get any competition in this process? You hire the CM and they've got free reign now. They're in it for themselves. Well, they're not really going to be doing the work. They negotiate their fee, but then they hire out subcontractors. And in the process of hiring the subcontractors, there is the bidding process, the traditional bidding process. So the concrete people and the pavers and the pipe installers and the electrical installers, they all do compete with each other, but instead of submitting bids to the city, they submit bids to the CMAR, and you still have, for the most part, competition in the process of selecting the people that are going to actually be doing the work. So it's not like there's no competition out there. There is plenty of competition for those folks, and so you don't have a risk of the CMAR running away and taking as much money as they want. Finally, of course, when you hire a contractor, typically the plans are done. Typically, they see the plans online, they bid on what's there. It's the first time they ever see the plans, they're done, and their opportunity to influence it is huge, is gone. Well, it's gone at that point. But if in the CMAR, where they're hired before the design, they do have the opportunity to participate in those plans. And I think, let me see where I'm going here. Well, I will change my focus a little bit from the CMAR process to this particular project, and why this particular project was a good place to use this tool, because you don't want to use this tool everywhere. It's not always the best thing, but in certain kinds of projects, for example, this downtown environment now where we have 80 businesses in 3 blocks of Main Street that need to be maintained during the process, and we need a contractor who cares about that. So we needed a contract manager who really understood that this was part of their job. They weren't just there to build stuff. They were there to build stuff and maintain these businesses. And that was certainly discussed significantly during the selection process, about their willingness and attentiveness to accept that role in addition to their more traditional role of building things. And we wanted one who not only understood that, but was eager to do that, who wanted to do that, who felt that was part of who they were and how they were going to be perceived and accepted in the community. And so it's not just a matter of understanding, but it's being eager to do that, to want to do that. And finally, they had to be willing to entice their subcontractors to do that, because their subcontractors were still functioning in a traditional bidding mode. But the CMAR did not necessarily have to accept the lowest bid. Even though there is a bidding process, they were not required to accept the lowest bid. So that allowed them some flexibility, especially if there's 2 bids that are quite close in cost. And the lowest one is a firm that they know, they've worked with them all before. They know these folks are maybe not who they really want on this job, so they can select the second lowest bid or whatever they feel is the best for the project as a whole. And if it's worth paying some extra money for the better subcontractor, they have the freedom to do that, because they are not constrained by the laws that the city is constrained by. And I do have to talk a bit of an aside here, or something that's not in my presentation, is I did all this under Virginia law, and I have not done a CMAR project in North Carolina. It is my understanding that laws here are quite similar to Virginia, but there may be nuances of which I am not yet familiar. So Just be aware that I'm talking from a Virginia perspective here, but I'm pretty sure we're good. And we are actually talking right now about having a CMAR project in the city of Fayetteville. So maybe I'll be back here in a couple of years with a more 100% confidence of how it works in North Carolina. But right now, I'm pretty sure that we're pretty similar here to what goes on in Virginia. The qualification-based selection maintains the competitiveness. I think I probably covered this already, but all subcontractors bid to the CM. And another point, though, that I didn't mention is the bids are not advertised. They're not put out there so that anybody can submit a bid. The CMAR solicits the bids. He goes to the firms that he knows he would be willing to have working on his project. So he doesn't get bids from the ones he's least comfortable with, only gets bids from ones that he already feels he's going to be pretty comfortable working with them. So that's another significant difference in the process, that you don't even have to be concerned about the firms that you're really not comfortable with at all. And you can focus only on the competition being among those that you're already feeling pretty good about. And I think I mentioned already, and this 90% number in Virginia in particular was flexible. We selected 90% as the number. There was another CMAR project in Lynchburg while I was there where they selected 50%. And this is a flexibility you have in writing the contract. You don't have to write the contracts exactly the way I am speaking today. You have flexibility in what you write, and it's part of that process that I'll talk about a little later, I hope, about negotiating and sharing the risk. But yeah, but there was another contract we did for a wastewater treatment plant work where it was 50% because a lot of that work was buying machinery, and an awful lot of the cost went into purchasing machinery that ran in the plant. And we felt that the CMAR needed to have expertise in that realm, but probably needed to do that work themselves. So, and a lot of that money was actually going to the machinery manufacturers and not to the contractor. So we wrote a different contract in that case. We wrote where only they could do up to 50% of the work instead of only 10% of the work in the work that I did, in the project that I did in downtown Lynchburg. So the third point in the difference in the uniqueness of the CMAR system is that the CM is involved in the design. So the CM is selected as early as possible in the process. There is no rigid rule as to when you have to select the CM, but you really want to do it sooner rather than later, because the longer you wait, the more the design is progressing and the less opportunity that CM will have to influence that process. If you get them in on day one, when you're still in the planning stage, that's awesome. Usually you're a little bit into it, but you know, it can happen anytime. My only advice is don't wait till the end, or you're losing one of the huge advantages you have of the process. So during the design process, when you have your traditional meetings between the owner and the designer, the contractor's there at those meetings. Is they're looking at the plans, looking at the 30% plans and looking at the 60% plans, and early in the process telling you, well, I wouldn't do it that way. You know, there's a better way to do that. And if you make this change, it's going to make it a whole lot easier for us, and we can do this work better. And you don't have to face that decision of negotiating a change order after you've accepted a low bid. You hear that beforehand, you write the plans in a way that the CM knows they want to accomplish this work. And that is one of the really huge benefits of the CMAR process. They actively participate in the design. Their suggestions are in there. And once they get to construction, they have all this knowledge too. They know why the plans are this way. And they're not looking at these plans saying, well, why'd you do that? You know, they already know why you did that, and they were part of that decision process. And that is a very significant value in that you don't have that learning curve going on when the contractor finally does get hired later in the more traditional design bid build process. So you have this during the whole process of design, the owner is of course talking to their CM, talking to the designer, but most importantly, down here on the bottom, they are talking to each other. They are each giving feedback to the other, and the designer is helping the contractor understand why things need to be a certain way, and the CM is helping the designer understand why things need to be a certain way. And that is a huge benefit that you really don't see in the design process in any other form of contracting. Well, I guess in the design build, you would see that too, but you don't see it in the traditional design bid build process. So I talked a little bit about this, some of the things you can do on your own, like whether you want 50% to allow the CM to do 50% of the work or 10% of the work. And there's a lot of other things you can talk about during the design process. And together, the three entities, the city or the owner, the contractor and the designer, can discuss where the risk is in this project. You know, what can go wrong? What do we not know about? Where are the hidden problems that we aren't addressed? And you can write your contract to address those risks. And the contractor has input into that process. They can say, well, if you will take away the risk of rock or the risk of unknown environmental issues, or depending, you know, the things you know or suspect might be issues with your site, if you can talk about that ahead of time, write a contract to reduce the contractor's risk, then you can get a better price. They don't have to budget for risk. And budgeting for risk, let me ask, are there any contractors in the room? Maybe I should have asked that a long time ago. No contractors in the room. Okay. But you know, the way I try to explain this is a difficult thing for many people to grasp and understand. They don't like it because they feel like the CM has too free a rein, or they have too much flexibility in their spending. And I like to tell them, well, you were going to pay for some of this stuff anyway. They were just going to build it into their bid. And so it's not like if something comes along and they automatically get a free rein to do a change order at a price that they set. It's like you were going to pay for that anyway, but it was going to be in their bid price. And in a typical contract, you get a bid price on day one, and from there the cost goes up. I mean, it rarely goes down. You get a bid price and it goes up from there. In a CMAR, you get your what is the term? The guaranteed maximum price at the beginning, but then things can go down. And I have always, in all three contracts I did, returned money to the city from my CMAR contract. They never spent the entire budget. Their bid, their guaranteed maximum price was never spent. It was always less, to the tune of, in the 5 to 10% range. But that money would have been in the bid if they had bid. And you would have paid them then. Whether they used it or not, it would have been profit to them and you'd have paid it. So it's not like they're able to add costs in if they need it. It's the costs that aren't added in that you really get the benefit from in this process. Let me look at my notes here and see. So the CMAR understands the project. The owner learns a lot too. The owner's learning a lot during this process of this conversation between the designer and the contractor, because the contractor's typically not in the room. So you're not learning those things until you're in this pressure situation of having to build things quickly. And so the owner's becoming smarter as you go along through this process. And you have this dialogue, and then you just mutually allocate the risk as you're negotiating a contract with your CMAR. So that's item number 4 on the list. And fine. Well, here, okay. Well, some of the uncertainties, I think we know of these, existing conditions are all an uncertainty that you can talk about. You can talk about performance factors during the allocation, the needs and the wants. It's a good time to discuss, well, we really like to add this certain feature in, but how much is it going to cost if we add that feature in? The contractor's right there to give you more knowledgeable answers. And you can decide, well, maybe we really we don't need that. We sort of want it, but maybe let's not do that because the delta, the change in cost is going to be more than we suspected for that particular feature. Options for flexibility. And then you also learn which decisions are really set in stone. The contractor or the CM knows the city, the owner has to have these things. They really want these things, as opposed to, well, they threw that in there, but if they don't get it, they might not, they might be able to accept that, or they might be able to accept some variations on that. You learn all these different things. You learn so much during this process that's tremendously valuable in knowing what this is going to cost you. So, in addition to trying to maintain 80 businesses during this contract, this process, we had COVID. So how many people wrote a contract to address what you were going to do when COVID hit? Like exactly zero, right? Nobody was prepared for COVID when it hit. But it had a huge impact on our downtown businesses. But we had a relationship with our contractor, our CM, and that enabled us. It was just so typical of the kinds of things that happened that we really didn't flinch when COVID hit. The contractor, again, they were eager to help us adapt to this. They knew we wanted to keep those businesses operating, and now they had a whole new thing to deal with that was not addressed in their contract. But it didn't matter that it wasn't in the contract. It was just part of the world of dealing with things that come up. And it was a real lifesaver for us during COVID that we were able to do things for our businesses that we probably couldn't have even done if we didn't have a construction contract going on. The city can't go out and modify downtown, modify traffic patterns, do whatever, that fast. We were able to react instantly, and we had people on the scene that could do it in a day sometime. We would make a decision that, well, we want to do that. We want to make this change to help, the new drive-through pickup restaurant business to get that functioning immediately. We had people out there, one phone call, can you do this, set this arrangement up? And they're like, yeah, we can do that. And it got done. I mean, faster than I could do that with my own city staff, really. So it was really a real bonus for us to have this process in place when COVID hit us in March of 2020. So finally, the last of the 5 pieces, the guaranteed maximum price. Basically, this says that the contractor, the CM, is not allowed to charge any more than this, and they have to manage the project to this budget. And owners love that, especially the higher up you go in a city organization, into the management organization and to city councils, hearing that term, the guaranteed maximum price, they think they've died and gone to heaven. This has got to be the perfect construction contract ever written, and they love it. So as this program was starting, I took a class, an ASCE class, in fact, in Pittsburgh, 2 or 3 day class. And when we got to the guaranteed maximum price portion of the training that I was in, the first thing that the instructor said that he wanted to say about the guaranteed maximum price was there were 2 things that we needed to know about the guaranteed maximum price. First, it's not guaranteed. And second, it's not the maximum. I was so relieved to hear that. It's like I had thought that all along. How can you possibly have a guaranteed maximum price? It's just like you can't possibly be that broad in your world, but it's not foolproof. there still can be changes. There still are things you have to do. But the reason he conceded it was just a misnamed terminology, poorly worded terminology. You know, it should be more like the most likely maximum price, you know, or we're pretty sure this is the maximum price. But guaranteed maximum price is just not the right name for it, but that has been accepted in the industry, and we're probably not going to change that now. But when I heard him say those two things, I thought, okay, I'm not missing this. There still can be changes. Obviously, if the city decides we want to change something, there goes the GMP, you know. And again, going back to the allocation of risk, you got a lower price because you agreed to take some of the risk off the contractor. Well, you bought that risk yourself, and you said in the negotiations, if this comes up, we'll cover that. Well, now you got to cover it, and your guaranteed maximum price might be escalated because you agreed to accept that risk in the process of writing the contract. So it's a misnamed terminology. The contractor is obligated to manage to that budget, but he's managing to it in a way that he knows where the problems are. He's already now way more confident himself that this is the best price. And there are contingencies in the contract too. We specifically have a line item for contingencies that the city can tap, the contractor can tap. I will advise you to make sure you pretty clearly define who gets to tap that and how and why. We never had a problem with us saying, well, we want to add this in, and the contractor saying, well, no, we don't want that cutting into our contingency, and vice versa. Whenever they wanted to use the contingency, we generally, in the 5 or 6 years that I did this, I only one time told a contractor, no, you can't use the contingency for that, because you know, there's always things that go wrong. There was one time though, we specifically, they were laying some brick sidewalk, and we told them in writing, if you do it this way, it's not going to work, and it's going to have to be torn out. I mean, that was in writing. If you do it wrong, you're going to tear it out. And they did it that way, and they had to tear it out, and they said they wanted to use the contingency to pay for it. I said, no, we told you ahead of time in writing. That was the only time I ever denied them to use the contingency for anything, because we had told them ahead of time that it just wasn't going to work that way. And I don't know why they did it. And it wasn't a huge amount of money. But other than that, whenever things came up, I always allowed them to use the contingency when they requested. They always allowed me to use the contingency when I requested. And as I said, all 3 contracts, I did return money. So we never totally used the contingency on either of those 3 contracts. What was I going to say? Oh, and they got 25% of that contingency. They got to share in the savings of not spending that money, even though it was available in their budget for them to use. They had to discuss it with us to use it, but they never used it all. We never requested it all. We always returned money to the city. So when there were savings, they got 25% of it, and the 75% below budget that we went back into the city funds. And so it was a good result, 3 out of 3 times. Risk allocation, I've already talked about that can affect the guaranteed. Hopefully it gets that GMP down at the beginning, but of course, the more risk you take off the contractor, then you're putting that risk on the owner, and that could affect the GMP there in the end. Yeah, most likely to be the final price. So, in summary, not only do we have these 5 features, but there's really synergy between these 5 features too, that maybe one might give you some value and another might give you some value, but together they give you even more value. And in the qualification-based selection is huge, because you get the contractor who has the attitude to work with you on this. You get the qualification-based selection gives you the contractor who is involved and interested in the design. You get the design participation, which allows you to do the risk allocation. And the risk allocation gives you this better price, misnamed as the guaranteed maximum price, but it's still a more accurate price. It more accurately reflects what you all think is really going to happen here. So it's for simple projects, I would not recommend this. You need to have the complexity, where you need the flexibility. I guess that's the key word. You needed to be able to change packs just on the fly. And when you need that flexibility, in our case, because of the business community we were trying to support, and the things we did to support the business community were not written, excuse me, were not written on the plans, and they weren't in the specs, etc. They we just figured them out on the fly. COVID hit, we figured it out on the fly, and we had a contract that allowed us to do that. So wherever there's complexity and uncertainty, I think it can be a very effective tool in managing a construction contract. So I'm done. Have you all gotten food?
Yeah, we're sitting.
Okay, I missed that. Okay, I was too busy talking. So any questions? Yes, sir.
I have about a million questions.
Million, all right. I've got
But I'll
13
say
minutes.
this. I personally feel like construction, CMAR is, I think, better than design build. I do.
I agree with you there.
Because design build, there could be big projects, but all of them are complex, and all of them have unique building, all of them. I think it's far better. But I do have questions regarding the guaranteed maximum price. When do you get that? Up front or after some amount of design is done?
Pretty late in the design.
That's better.
Pretty late in the, like 90%.
When you get that.
Yeah, you should be getting estimates throughout the process. Your CMAR should be giving you estimates as you go through the design, but you don't sign the contract till you're at 90%.
Okay, so does anybody evaluate the estimates?
Yes.
Who does that?
City staff, yeah. City staff, yeah. And the engineer, absolutely. The engineer certainly participated in those too. Yeah, and the engineer actually produced their own estimate, and then the CMAR produced their estimate, which was, you know, if we accepted it, would become the GMP, the guaranteed maximum price. But yeah, no, city staff and the engineer both had input.
So if it's at 90% design, then that guaranteed maximum price is going to be a price that a construction manager is comfortable with at that point.
At that point, yes, sir.
And it won't be as high as it would have been if you had asked for that GMP earlier.
Hopefully, that's the theory. Yes.
How is that fee for the CMAR? Is that percent of cost?
Well, you can write a contract how you want to write a contract. We arrived at it through a percentage. I mean, that's how we came up with it originally. And at times but we negotiated that too. We negotiated the percent. I mean, we wanted 1% and the contractor wanted a different percent. Yeah, but ultimately, that's the way we agreed to the percent. Engineers were hired the way we've always hired an engineer.
Because he would know how many comments.
Well,
how much checking of different design alternatives. There is a worthwhile effort. It is extra work.
It is extra work on their part. And yes, you probably will pay them a little more than you would if they did not have to review it. But they were aware though that would be part of their scope of work. So they factored that into their estimate. And you know, we obviously paid for that service. Exactly. You, like I said, you were going to pay for that anyway, ultimately down the road. So at least this way you knew up front what you were paying for, to the point that you labeled it a guaranteed maximum price.
It sounds like it's pretty flexible negotiation.
Very much so.
You're not getting in any man pay to
No,
and all that stuff.
no. And again, you have the bids from the subcontractors too. They were not allowed to mark up their bids from the subcontractors at all. That was strictly dollars out, dollars in, dollars out. There's no profit on that. They got their profit from the fee, which was negotiated ahead of time before they ever had the bids from the subs. Possibly, you know, in this case, we did it because of the uncertainties of working in a downtown environment. I mean, you know, especially not only is there maintaining the businesses, but in an old ancient downtown, where we're not quite ancient, but old downtown like Lynchburg, we had what I called underground surprises all the time. I mean, just old stuff that was buried, and you dug up a pipe and you didn't know it was there. I mean, I had instances where we tore up an intersection and we had a key intersection that we wanted to hurry up and get reclosed. And on day 2, we discovered a duct bank that was just like 2 feet underground. And it took us at least a week and a half to figure out whose duct bank it was. We wanted to be done by then. And we've got this intersection closed with a duct bank, and we don't know who even owns it. Once we got somebody to acknowledge, oh yeah, that's our duct bank, then they had to go through designing a replacement, getting the materials for the replacement, coming in and replacing it. And then we could go back to work. We lost 6 weeks on that. 6 weeks. So those underground surprises, that uncertainty that in a traditional contract would be very controversial. Oh, you're causing us delays now. You know, we're not, no liquidated damages on this. It was just another thing we dealt with. So those underground surprises were a big reason. We had rooms, many of the basements of the buildings, the building face was the property line, and the basements of the building actually went out into the public right of way underneath the sidewalk. So what we thought we owned was actually part of this building that we didn't own. And in most cases, we had like 15 of those. I'm forgetting the number now. We had 1 or 2 of them we didn't, that actually had one of them had elevator equipment in it outside in the public right of way. You know, another one had telephone equipment. Some of it had carpeting and you know, drop ceilings in it. A lot of them were just empty holes that, you know, they used to use for deliveries back in the old days when the carts would come up the street and they would deliver materials to the businesses. A lot of them were just filled in, but we had one had a swimming pool in it. Had the YWCA swimming pool went out on the public right away. Yes, sir.
How old is the City of Lynchburg? Curiosity.
Early 1800s. Lynchburg was the largest city in Virginia at one point. Its history, you know, back when transportation technology was different and the rivers were the big thing. Early 1800s, yes. I think our water system averaged over 100 years old downtown. So that put us back in the late 1800s, but that was, of course, there was a well-thriving city well before then. So I'd say early 1800s. It was old. And again, those kind of uncertainties, though, if it had been a virgin site, let's see why you can use traditional design bid build, you know. Yes, Sunny.
Sounds like an interesting project. I'm sure when you go back, you'll have a lot of stories to tell. Okay. I think one of the slides you said at least 90% of the work needs to be bid. What do you mean by that? Is it?
That the CM that you hire can't do that work themselves. They have to hire subs to do that work. So they hired a utility sub, and they hired a concrete sub, and they hired a paving sub, you know, and they did do some work themselves. They actually had their own crew doing some minor amounts of work, but it was only money that went through them to someone else. They were not built, it wasn't their crews doing the work. And that is a flexible number, as I said, it didn't have to be 90, we picked that.
Are subs comfortable with it?
They were not at first. We had some reluctance on the first one for subs to even bid. But as we established a history, it got better. Yeah. And then we were happy. But no, at first there was some concern that they didn't understand this. They didn't know what they were getting into, you know.
Yeah.
So there was definitely some reluctance at first. We had to make some phone calls and, you know, say, look, you know, this is who this, you know, do our best to sell to them so that they would bid. But we got over that in time. As I said, we did 3 consecutive projects downtown, and they're designing the 4th right now. So I kept getting better.
What's interesting is the subs, well, all of a sudden we're in a situation where they were, in effect, selling their qualifications because they didn't have to be low bid necessarily. So the question might be, how many times did you not pick low bid subs?
I think once. I think just once.
Not much then.
Not much, no, because as I said, we only allowed them to bid by invitation. So we were already comfortable with all of them. We eliminated the ones we knew we didn't want. It was only when we had 2 that we really liked, but one was a little better than the other, and the delta in cost was not that much. No, we didn't. Well, oh no, 3 was about typical. Patrick, is Patrick?
Yeah.
I know I'm getting like 2 minutes left.
From people on Zoom.
Let's take a look. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you for.
Nope. Doesn't look like we have any other questions online, so.
Okay. One other thing I'll add before
Please.
you mentioned the ASCE movie. Has anyone seen that? I got a chance to see that. It's pretty cool. Yeah. Well, the new one, the Cities of the Future one, I got to see that. I also saw Dream Big. If you haven't seen that one, that's been out for a couple of years. But a plug for the new one. All right.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.